It's nice to hear you, but I don't see you.
Okay, we'll zoom in and we have the team. Yeah, this is me.
There. Okay.
She's at the head of the table. Hi, sir. Hi, Shobana.
I'm not the head, sir. I'm just.
All right.
No, head of the table. Head of
Organizing
the table.
Nice to hear you. Nice to see you.
Okay, ma'am, shall we start? I think.
Just 3 minutes more. I think we should wait for 2 o'clock. That would be, yeah, right.
We should start, I think.
I'll just go and get my mobile and come.
We can, I think, Professor Sartorius have some work.
Yeah.
And we should not overstep time. So I think somebody has to keep time for us.
We have 2 more minutes, so we at sharp 2 we will start off.
Okay.
And Dr. Abhishek will keep the time from our side.
And he can raise a hand.
Yeah, but he will not be seen, I think. No, I will raise the hand.
Yeah.
Shobana also from LGBRIMH?
Yes, sir. She's mute. I
I'm
think she's mute.
During my MPhil days and PhD days, you used to come to LGBRIMH for some work or the others.
Shall we?
Perfect time.
I think it's 2 o'clock. Good afternoon to each and everyone who has gathered here on this occasion of World Mental Health Day. You all are aware this webinar is being organized by the LGB Regional Institute of Mental Health in Tezpur, Assam, India. I accord a warm welcome to all our participants, who especially it includes our invited guest speakers for the day, that is the chief guest and the guest of honor. We have also with us the director of the institute, Dr. S.K. Deori, the faculty of the institute from various departments, the staff, scholars, students, and all our stakeholders across and around us who are connected with this institute. Thank you to all of you who have graced this occasion, that too on a Sunday. I take this opportunity to welcome our chief guest on the session for the session, Professor Norman Sartorius, sir. We have been overjoyed for your generosity in accepting our invitation at short notice. And we have also with us Dr. Ajidi, who has also accepted our invitation at a short notice. And to introduce our speakers for the day, Professor Norman Sartorius, he's a psychiatrist by profession, and he has been the director of mental health program of World Health Organization, and he has also been the president of World Psychiatric Association and the European Psychiatric Association. He now heads as president of a non-profit organization called as the Association for Improvement of Mental Health, which is located at Geneva. He holds several professional positions in Europe, USA, and elsewhere. He has published more than 500 papers and is in the peer-reviewed journals and authored, co-authored, edited, and co-edited multiple books. Professor Sartorius' main area of interest has been comorbidity of mental and physical disorders and the reduction of stigma across mental disorders and education of various mental health professionals. And he has also been a principal investigator for multiple collaborative studies across countries. And he's been a leader speaking on behalf of various across, especially for the mental health professionals and for the stigma-related programs across countries in the low-income group countries specifically. Thank you, sir, for accepting our invitation and also a warm welcome to you, sir.
Very much.
We have also with us Dr. Ajit Vasant Vide, who is an alumnus of St. John's Medical College, Bangalore, and also of National Institute of Mental Health, Bangalore. And he is no doubt a psychiatrist by profession. Many of us know him because he's from the country. And he has also headed as the president of Indian Psychiatric Society. And he has also been the main man behind St. Martha's Hospital, setting up the psychiatry department at St. Martha's Hospital in Bangalore. And he continues there currently as emeritus consultant. And his main areas of interest are child and adolescent mental health. And of course, he is known as a multifaceted personality with a spectrum of interests in varied fields. That's what we know him for. And he is known as a well-known orator in the field of psychiatry and a dramatist, as I know him. And we welcome you, sir. And we do know that you have been associated with multiple areas of research, and especially you have a keen interest in the area of LGBTQ, and he has been actually the man behind the decriminalization of LGBTQ in India through the Indian Psychiatric Society. And I, on behalf of the Institute, would accord him a very warm welcome and thank you for accepting our invitation. I once again welcome all the participants here, all across people who have joined in the webinar. And I would like to request the director take forward this program, Dr. S.K. Deori, to take over the address and the webinar partners along with all the in order to address the webinar participants.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Dr. S.K. Deori. I'm a psychiatrist by training, and I am heading this setup here in northeast part of this country. So it's a matter of great pleasure for me to be a part of this team in LGBRIMH, who's organizing this webinar on mental health in an unequal world on the day of World Mental Health Day. To touch upon and introduce today's topic, I am taking the liberty of flagging some issues in a nuts and bolts level, because as the old adage goes, devil lies in the details. Within my allotted 5 minutes time, and I'll request my team to just remind me as soon as I reach my 4 minutes so that I don't digress or overstep my time. To start with, let me recount a workshop which was held in the early 90s under behest of Professor Sartorius, that was held with collaboration of WHO and NIMANS for young mental health professionals. I was a young man then, sir. So after that, during that workshop, one thing became that was the first time I had the opportunity of observing how Professor Sartorius thinks and functions. What happened during that time, we had several rounds of discussions, and during that discussions, it came up, he asked very specifically to all of us, okay, let's see how much work you have done in what areas. Then many of us have come up with saying that, okay, I'm working in, published 20 papers, somebody said 30 papers, and so on. So when my time came, I had to sheepishly agree that, sir, I have done just only one work all these days, and I am tied down to that work for quite some more time to come. And I am the craftsman in the vision of your that mental health for community at that time. And we have many architects around, so I am the worksman who will be doing the baseline work. That was my, that's what I had to say to him. So he said, okay, all of you try to help him out. He has got a huge task ahead of him. I remember him saying that to the whole group. So now, when I came to work in this particular institute, I was a lone ranger. So I needed to create an example by transforming an institute, which was a 150-year-old asylum. This was the institute I was working with. So any long history always has the baggage of, always has a very heavy baggage. It was an unequal space in another parlance, because in the healthcare work, as this asylum was a prison, was a place for the destitutes. It was a place for the suspected, that is quote and unquote, doubted to be a mentally ill, under trial prisoner, committed criminally ill people, and a place for the long-term care for the homeless. It also doubled as, say, a sheltered workshop for many, and most importantly, all of were uncared for and underfed to a great extent. This is where the nuts and bolt challenge started. And repurposing of the staff and the structure took a huge, it took a huge effort, consuming a long time, and it required liaison in many governmental and other levels. Most of the staff at that time could not be laid off and or transferred, and were hugely resistant to change. Because it was in our setup, we cannot just throw out people as such. That was our idea at that time. And the take of those employees were, we cannot be forced to do what we did not sign for. Now I'm happy to announce that all these efforts paid off. The hard work of so many years we have been able to have a place now, which is a multi-speciality postgraduate training institute, and which was taken over by the government of India as a third institute in this level. So we are betterly placed, and we are in a set of saying that, okay, this is how things can be done. This will take another, it will take another long speech to say, but we'll do it later anyway, sometime. The second part of my job started about 2 to 3 years back, when the provincial governments of the NER were on principle been brought into a common platform. And for that, we had to do a lot of liaison work to create an equitable mental health facility for all its citizens. And for the benefit of those who are not very accustomed to this part of the country, to say that NER part of the northeastern region of our country has a huge diversity in terms of religion, ethnicity, literacy level, cultural practices, and it also has a huge linguistic diversity. It has 3 Hindu states, 1 Roman Catholic state, 2 Protestant states, 1 Buddhist state, and 1 animist. And out of that, Mizoram ranks among the first 3 of the most literate states in the country, and the rest, we are somewhere much behind. And religious, ethnical and language-wise, we have more than 200 different dialects, languages, subcultures, etc. So this is only to give an understanding of how diverse it can be. So this may be because of the geographical sequestration that has made all this, created all these compartments. So making mental health available, acceptable, and affordable to all is a challenge where all these fronts will have to be addressed. For most of the population in distant part of these areas, mental health still has not yet imbibed the slogan that there is no health without mental health. Health has not yet imbibed the slogan, but we are on the process. And I'm sure another 3 years from now, we will be in a position to say that this is what has been happening around. Thank you. So now, going back to this is something we are looking forward from our esteemed speakers today. And I'm also, like Sonia said some time back, Dr. Ajidi is a person with a lot of interest in different areas. And I'm sure he has also been working extensively in opening up another interface, particularly with the youth, so that this is another different experiment which I'll be in touch with Dr. Vide later on. That's going on here. It's a totally different type of experiment involving youths. So with all this, I think I have already gone my 5 minutes. So I have to end here because I have been signaled by all of my staff that I have already crossed my time. Thank you very much, sir. Welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you, sir, for your a brief insight into the long history of our institute. With this, I would like to hand over the stage, as to say, to Dr. Ajidi for him to please take on from here, sir, with his topic on inequalities and youth mental health. So over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Shobna. I know we are a little behind schedule, so I will be quick to get on with the business at hand. Having said that, I'm taking my own sweet time. I don't know how to get to show.
This slide is visible.
I can see, but I want to get to slideshow.
Slideshow and say from the beginning. That is on the 4th. No, so it's already there. Okay. Cancel, sir. And then go after animation, you can see slideshow being.
That's not showing up because there's a panel before that.
Okay.
Right. So without more ado, I chose this topic after Sonia called me and said that she'd like me to take part. I have never been to that part of the country and I wouldn't mind being there, at least virtually to start with. And I was delighted, Dr. Deori, when you said that you intend to do work with youth mental health. I'd love to be involved in some way, and that might bring some geographical proximity as well, I hope, in the future. But almost fresh off the press, in the papers very, very recently, we had this report from the UNICEF, the Indian arm of it. Children and young people in India could feel the impact of COVID-19 on their mental health and well-being. Children in India have been through a challenging time living through the risks and restrictions posed by the pandemic. Nothing could have prepared them for the onslaught of the second wave of the pandemic. Children witness suffering and uncertainties that no child should have come to see. Being away from family, friends, classrooms, and play cause isolation and anxiety. Children have not only been living an emotional tragedy, many are also at a higher risk for neglect and abuse, said the UNICEF India representative, Dr. Huck. Very important over here is that the parents have been severely affected. And the effect on the parents, no doubt, has percolated down to the children, and that has aggravated the picture. Of course, we're not here today to speak merely about the pandemic, but I think the pandemic has aggravated the problems in mental health for different sections of the society, not the least by young people. According to the latest available estimates, more than 1 in 7 adolescents aged 10 to 19 is estimated to live with a diagnosed mental disorder globally. Important for us, of these, South Asia had the highest number of adolescents with mental disorders, according to the report. Also, not stated over here, suicide is also highest in this part of the world. In India, children and adolescents with mental health disorders are mostly undiagnosed and hesitant in seeking help or treatment. Even before the pandemic, at least 50 million children in India, this is a report in the Indian Journal of Psychiatry from 2019, 50 million children in India were affected with mental health issues. 80 to 90%, a staggering majority, have not sought support. Meanwhile, wide gaps persist between mental health needs and mental health funding. We are all aware of the measly amount of money our government chooses to give at the expense of defense and infrastructure. Health and education, health particularly, is a hugely neglected area. My focus today will be on young people, and I'll go by the UNICEF WHO definition of young people. Young people are mainly those in the range, hold your breath, between 15 and 24 years. I will deal with inequalities that pervade their lives. And of course, we will be focusing largely on the LAMI nations, that is the low and middle income nations. And then within that, more about India. That's the territory I'm familiar with. What is inequality? Measures of inequality usually focus on economic indices. However, inequality can be based on access to adequate living conditions, such a pervasive thing. We just move out of the cities of India and you see the disparities, the differences that occur to us just 7-8 kilometers away from the heart of the city. Access to schooling, social networks, access to political forums, or a decent working environment. A word of caution about the political forums, of course, because these can be greatly abused and they can also cause derangement in normal developmental life. Chronic social and economic inequality range from unequal terms of international trade, not very relevant to us just now, but to abusive working conditions, to entrenched political capture of policy influence. Girls and women in general face greater forms of inequality than their social peers, and gender bias very strongly reinforces all forms of inequality. Several studies have shown that extreme economic inequality is bad for overall economic growth across the world. And this compounds the pre-existing inequalities between women and men, as also those based on rural versus urban areas. One broad comparative study found that, this is important, the poorest rural women are almost 6 times more likely than the richest urban men to never attend school. And we know how great at least basic high school education is for general well-being. And then to mental health. Mental health inequalities are strongly associated and embedded within the broader social economic context. An inverse relationship between socioeconomic status and mental disorders has been documented right from the time of Hollingshed and Redlich. In almost all nations, the poor are at a higher risk for developing mental disorders compared to the non-poor. So what do we know about poverty? Poverty is both a determinant as well as a consequences of poor mental health. In other words, mental health disorders increase the likelihood of people having to live in poverty, perhaps because this influences their functionality, their ability to get sustainable employment, their earnings itself, and conversely, poverty increases the likelihood of developing mental disorders. No doubt this is an absolutely vicious cycle. The consequences of mental health inequalities include continued unnecessary suffering and premature deaths, increased stigma and marginalization. There is a lack of investment in mental health workforce and infrastructure, and limited or a lack of treatment for people suffering from these conditions, something that is very tragic and that we have not adequately addressed even after 75 years of independence. In many developing nations with mental health policies, scarce resources, as well as lacking of infrastructure, ineffective advocacy, and the lack of political will limits effective mental health legislations and interventions. We have inched forward in this particular area in our country. These nations often lack effective mental health champions who can galvanize communities and policymakers to address the mental health needs. Families of people with mental health problems are quite often marginalized and are limited in their ability to champion for mental health issues due to the stigma associated with our particular discipline. Some progress is being made to redress these challenges posed by mental health, but the efforts are still few and far between. Young women and men today must grapple with serious social, political, environmental problems, and these are inherited from the elders. I remember my father speaking to me 50 years ago and apologizing on behalf of his generation. And today I have to apologize to the next generation. And the apologizing goes on, but the real situation doesn't seem to change drastically or noticeably even. Yet they are systematically excluded from policy decisions, even though young people make up over 1/4 of humanity. By young people, we know, are full of energy, creativity, and they have ample talents that need to be properly tapped. And by marshalling these, the multiple inequalities they face, we will reap a demographic dividend and build a fairer world, something we've repeatedly said, but done very little about. If you look at inequalities, the context could be economic, which affects the living conditions, the educational facilities, access to facilities, including technology. At the social level, ethnicity, religion, and language come included in that. In our country, race and very, very importantly, caste are important factors that attend upon ethnicity. Gender orientation issues to which we have woken up a little late, but nevertheless, better late than never. The political atmosphere, and of course, attendant in these social circumstances of this country, nepotism, raising its ugly head every turn of life. Gender, overwhelmingly, everything is weighted heavily against females. Location, of course, we know the differences between the urban and the rural, but we have a certain degree of stability in our rural segment, except that significant fractions of them are moving on to the urban, where there is a whole lot of chaos. And then we have the international consideration, where we have the countries of the haves and the countries of the have-nots. And what are the consequences, especially consequences in the youth? When they see this kind of a conundrum, there is first bewilderment. This is shaped into anxiety. Anxiety then goes on to anger. Anger leads to rebellion, and this rebellion may turn violent or it may take a passive-aggressive turn. Neither is particularly good for mental health. Violence, of course, has a more devastating, overt violence has a more devastating effect than passive aggression, but that isn't healthy either. There is, as a result of this, a certain degree of despondency, which can go on to clinically significant depression. In the desperate state, the person may then engage in acts of self-harm, including suicide. We also know that man is a self-medicating animal. So to seek relief, to find himself relief, he takes recourse to chemicals, and this is sometimes a very unhealthy mode of operation, leading to substance abuse, ethanol abuse, and of course, attendant upon all this is crime. Anomie is what we are speaking about, normlessness. And it's significant that in this country, for over 6 decades, we have been living in conditions of varying degrees, including from the moderate to the very severe anomie. And when it becomes chronic, it can create a havoc, especially in the lives of young people. But there is hope. Recent years have seen a considerable uptick in interest of youth issues among political leaders and civil society groups. In the last decade, there has been an explosion of meetings, summits, forums, and other events aimed at advancing innovative solutions to problems that affect youth and building connections among youth from different regions of the world. In other words, collaborations. And I think this is a very significant happening in today's world. Similarly, there has been a 50% increase in the number of countries that now have national youth policies. In our own country, the Kishore Vikas Yojanas are quite a significant step ahead undertaken by the government. Millions of youth around the world face discrimination based on their gender, sexual orientation, race, caste, religion, we've mentioned all these, ethnicity, also their physical abilities or the place where they live. The intersectional nature of these forms of systemic discrimination experienced by youth, by young people, deserves special attention. Now, we speak about the youth as being our great resource, but if today's youth are to become the motor of tomorrow's economic takeoff, policymakers must make concerted efforts to enhance youth participation in policymaking. Young people should be involved as active citizens, architects of their own future, but not the only architects. That caveat must be there. Youth deserve quality education and access to health services and to the training and support they need to obtain decent and sustainable employment. Policymakers should look beyond employment and education to address other fundamental inequalities young people face. Youth is, of course, not a homogeneous group, and certainly young people are more affected by inequality. In our own country, the sharp difference that we see between the rural youth and the urban youth is a case in point. Very, very, very important. We need dynamic, ethical, and most importantly, exemplary leadership, something that has been missing from our lives for way too long. Young people will be instrumental in finding solutions to the challenges of inequality. Today's youth form the generation that has the best chance to end poverty, address climate change, not necessarily end it, ensure sustainable developmental goals become a reality or at least come closer to these goals. Support and solidarity from the elders can help them gain the power, knowledge, and skills to achieve these goals. And what exactly are we expecting from the elders? Elders must play their part with wisdom, adequacy of empathy, authority that is not dictatorial, an upfront attitude that is transparency, and most importantly, and I said this already, but it bears repetition, leading by example. The examples that we have and are being followed, coupled with the phenomenon of nepotism that I mentioned, has led to great tragedies that still attend on our country. Also, the elders must be open to questioning. They must have large enough hearts to accommodate the brashness of youth, of course, within limits. The richness of peer influence must be recognized, and this peer influence must be duly tempered. The elders must not have a dismissive attitude to what comes in from fellow youth. Inequality in its various forms poses a fundamental challenge to youth well-being today around the world. I call your attention to excellent documents from the agency of Oxfam. In spite of all this, there is hope. And we have certain crusaders who have been great examples as youth leaders, one historical and the other somewhat current. In the field of environmental health, Greta Thunberg and the impact she has had on people's thinking about the impact that climate change has had on the planet. I think this is something we have been alerted to in the last decade or so. At a personal level, a highly traumatized, very young lady from Pakistan who survived miraculously the assault on her brain, her cranium, and has come through as a world leader. Now, of course, it's cliche that she's a Nobel laureate, but she continues to show leadership in the realm of youth well-being. At a societal level, and this is the little historical note in these among these crusaders, you see over there a class of medical students from the 50s. The face circled over here, that is a face that I would like you to pay attention to. And this was a man who, as a young final year medical student, was moved by the plight of the deprived. He chose a path of revolution. We are speaking, of course, about Che, and the massive impact that his method had on life in the northern part of South America is today legendary. He started a revolution believing that this is going to bring about massive change. There was change, but unfortunately, poorly guided youth can lead to tragedies, as is the case with the example of Che Guevara. In my youth, he was an idol, but today I think I believe with age, a little wisdom has come, and I see that this kind of excessive rebellion can be actually grossly counterproductive. We have from our own country these two examples of Dayal and Kumar, these two young people. One worked for the rights of females to address their own sexual and reproductive lives without interference from medieval norms. The other worked towards gender equality and got rights for women to enter areas of employment which had been denied to them for generations together. And these are the people whose examples we have to bear in mind to say that even as inequalities affect our lives, there is hope that youth themselves will lead movements with the guidance of elders to take us forward, reduce the inequality. We cannot totally undo them because time, the subtle thief of youth, John Milton called time the thief of youth, because youth cannot wait. Youth passes on relatively fast. Also, along with that, we dare not forget that mental health cannot wait either. I'd like to thank you for your patient listening. I'd like to thank particularly Dr. Sonia Pereira Deori, who extended this invitation to me. Short notice did not matter, Sonia. The warmth of your invitations were counted with for me. And to share the podium with Dr. Norman Sartorius was not a chance I was going to give up. Dr. S.K. Deori, Director, Dr. Shobana, Harihara Subramaniam, I think I got your name right, has been in touch with me. And mainly, thanks to all of you for your patient listening. I hope you can carry home one message, that youth are troubled. The inequalities that they encounter are of great importance, and that we need to do enough about it, but give them a voice as well. Thanks very much.
Thank you, sir, for basically giving the voice to the youth through your voice to the of the youth. Through you, we could hear their issues. You highlighted the inequalities in the context of youth mental health, and thank you for leaving us with hope. So now I would like to invite Dr. Sartorius to speak on the theme of today, that is mental health in an unequal world. Sir, over to you.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I've been to many parts of India, but never to Assam. I hope that once this pandemic is over, or at least controlled, there will be a chance also to come and meet you personally. But for the moment, we will have to think about the together and meet only virtually. Mental health in an unequal world has been the theme which the World Federation for Mental Health has decided as a topic for this year's World Mental Health Day. The World Federation for Mental Health is an organization that came into existence immediately after the war, the Second World War. And it came into existence as an expression of a wish to be human to each other and to work together and to help those who are in distress. It had a huge response from many countries, and was the one which in its time also was participating in the WHO section, and is one which has supported the creation of the mental health unit at the time in the World Health Organization. And so some years later in its existence, it has proposed to have the 10th of October as the Mental Health Day. And from there on, it does have these mental health days, which are basically an effort to remind people that mental health is important and that something should be done to people who have suffering. Now, something happening here. I can't move the slides. This is curious. I want to start by saying that mental health, what it is not. I think it's important that we realize that, because mental health is not the absence of mental illness. Mental health is also not a state of well-being. Although WHO in its time spoke of health as being a state of well-being, but mental health is not a state of well-being. It's not that you must feel well in order to be mentally healthy. It is not a calmness in the face of adversity either, nor is it decent behavior in keeping with the moral principles of a society. It's not high capacity of memory or high intelligence either. And it's certainly not the experience of happiness. None of these things are mental health. And it's important that we recognize this and that we think about it in this way. I think mental health can be defined as a dimension of our existence, which is always present. It's part of a description of what we are. It's always present. And perhaps sometimes it's hidden by diseases or by worries about survival or by frightening changes of the environment or the experience of hopelessness. It's in a way I want to compare it with the skies, which are present even when they are hidden by clouds. Clouds are diseases, clouds are worries, clouds are changes of the environment, clouds are injustice. All of these things are clouds, but behind it all, mental health is present. And equally so, it is also present when mental illness appears. And that is important because it will direct our action in a special way. I think it can be defined as a state of balance within ourselves and between ourselves and our environment, the living environment and the non-living environment which surrounds us. We have to think of that balance. Today we are talking about environmental deterioration and various other things because people have forgotten to think about the balance which they have to establish with the environment in which they live. And I think that understanding mental health as a state of balance and as a dimension of our existence leads us in the way in which it can be strengthened, even though the world is unequal. All of what Dr. Vida was saying is absolutely true. But in spite of all of this, we can think of mental health as being present, as being promotable, as being improvable, as being something that should be our characteristic. I think that what inequality means today is all of these things that I've written here. The fact that such a huge proportion of the world's population lives in conditions of poverty, not only ordinary poverty, but ultimate poverty, which last year a report of the United Nations declared that the number of people, the proportional number of people who live in conditions of absolute poverty has gone down. It's now 1 or 2% less than last year. But in terms of numbers, there are more totally poor people today than last year. And their number, unfortunately, is not diminishing. It's also the inequalities because of the cultures of the world still differ so much in the rules which they impose that they are members. And not all of their rules which they are imposed by culture are useful. And we are all living with them because we believe that we must belong to the culture in which we are, but not all of them are promoting mental health. The unequal world also means that there are huge differences in the level of education among people, both within countries and across countries, and that healthcare services are not available. In most of the countries of a low and middle income, up to 80% of all people with mental illness have no treatment at all. No, they can't even afford the traditional healers. They cannot afford anything. And I think in countries such as France or England or the countries which are rich, there's still about 20 to 25% of the people with the most serious forms of mental illness which are not receiving any treatment. They live under the bridges and as people without steady address. And I think it's a terribly important thing to recognize that these health services are not available. And then in addition to these inequalities that I listed here, there are now several trends which affect the world and which are very important in our thinking about inequality. The first of those is the urbanization. It has never been as rapid as it is now. Now, there are countries such as Argentina in which 95% of the population live in towns. But even countries which were previously almost completely rural, such as Mongolia, has now 70% of the population living in towns. China is the same. Many other countries which previously had mostly a rural population are now gradually moving towards urban settings. And some of the undoubtedly largest cities of the world are all in countries with low income. New Delhi, Jakarta, Mexico City, you name them, all of the big cities are in fact in these countries. But what does urbanization mean? On one hand, it is wonderful in that it brings possibilities to have light and to have easy access to health services and to have roads and to have water, all of these things. Not all of people have, but at least it is available. But at the same time, it has also a powerful psychological effect. Zobida has mentioned anomie, which has been first described in France some 150 years ago, where people in towns suddenly lose who they are. They are just anonymous. They are there, but nobody knows who they are. And there are no links. And the community, which we were previously describing as a geographically defined group of people who know each other and help each other, has vanished. People in Argentina, with 95% of the population in towns, do not know one another anymore. And the notion that this is a community is not true. The ideas that we had about community medicine and community psychiatry now have to be revised, because with urban settings, the original thinking about communities is no longer valid. It's different now. We have to think of how do we operate medicine in general, psychiatry in particular, in towns which are composed of people which are living alone. In London, the recent survey has shown that 28% of all households are single-person households, where a person lives alone and nobody visits them. And when they are sick, nobody visits them either. And there is nobody to talk to in the morning. And I think that rapid urbanization also has a tremendous influence on the children, because the insecurity and juvenile gangs and the complete loss of contact with nature. Children who have never seen a cow in their life because they live in towns. I've recently been with somebody who could not believe that fish have heads because they've never seen a fish in reality. It's a complete separation which happened in many countries. And that rapid urbanization is continuing and will not spare any one country, even if some of them today have still a rural population. And then there is the omnipresent digitalization. The fact that we have now started doing everything electronically. It's wonderful. It allows us now to talk to one another across thousands of kilometers. Wonderful. It has also helped us to make it possible to bring records from one institution to another. It has made it possible to deal with what is called big data, vast amounts of data, which allow us to study and understand what goes on much better. In healthcare, there are all the machines that you can possibly imagine. But while it has done these benefits, it is also contributing significantly to what people have called a dehumanization of medicine, a dehumanization of society. There has never been such a huge increase of traditional healers in highly developed countries as now. People go to seek magnetizers and herbalists and various other traditional healers. Why? Because they listen to them. While the machinery, where you fill in a form, you pass it on, and then somebody inscribes you by computer, etc., is not giving the human contact which people seek when they are not well. So digitalization is at present, unfortunately, likely to become our master instead of being our servant. We should not allow that, but it is a danger that is looming. And then there is what has been called the commoditification of healthcare. Commoditification is a word that has been invented by the World Bank. It basically says that everything should be treated as if it was a commodity. So like iron or cotton. And basically what it means is that whatever brings money is good and whatever doesn't bring money is not good. So does a hospital function well? they look to see whether the hospital makes a profit. If it does make a profit, it's not a good hospital. We have to do a reform so as that it makes profit. And equally so for everything else. When you come forward and you say we should do something about stigma, it says, what will it bring us in money if people are not stigmatized? Will it change things? And this, recently I was greatly honored by receiving an honorary doctorate. And I was so proud with this recognition. I spoke to our colleagues, young colleagues here, and they said, will it increase your salary? Well, it won't increase my salary. But it was for me, it was terribly important. But for them, even the nature that they ask the question means that the reward for academic achievement has no value unless it is expressed in terms of higher salary, higher position, or other things that we normally. So in a way, healthcare is becoming an economic opportunity instead of being an ethical imperative. It's not imperative to help other people. It's imperative to make money. And if you can do it while helping people, so much the better. And I think the commoditification is also particularly bad in countries which are poor, where privately run services are of superb quality, while the general health services provided by the government are very often miserable and getting less and less valuable, not least because they attract people out, the best people into it. And we've done a small survey recently asking young people where they would like to go. And their first priority is the highly paid private service in their own country. After that is immigration to England or to America or I don't know where. And after that, far behind is the notion of working in the government health service. Then there is also what has been called horizontalization of communication. Communication today is becoming horizontal. Young people talk to young people. Young people speak or have communication and a language with young. There is very little vertical communication between parents and children, grandparents and parents and children and grandchildren. That is being disturbed in a very significant manner. And of course, if the horizontalization between people in the same profession, people in the same age group, etc., happens, you can see that all of the experience that the world has created will never get used because it's not transmitted. It is not transmitted in reality because these layers of horizontal layers live in isolation from one another. And then there is the phenomenon which has been called the decivilization of society. You can define civilization and measure it by the amount of care that a society provides to its feeble members, to the children, to the elderly, to the sick. That is what a civilization is all about. And unfortunately, we see that on that grounds, there is less attention to the feeble, less attention to the disabled, less attention to the elderly in most countries of the world. Sometimes a combination between horizontalization and decivilization, so that a country which is traditional, such as Bangladesh, now has to pass a law which will punish children if they don't look after their parents. The notion that it is an ethical duty of you to think about your parent is gone, obviously, because otherwise such a law would not be necessary. And the same is true in a country like China, which has for centuries been promoting the notion that the most important thing is to think about the ancestors. And now 60 to 70% of all widowers, elderly widowers in Peking, in Beijing, have to hire somebody from the rural areas to be with them because their children don't want to be with them. So what can we do then to enhance mental health in this world, which is having all these trends moving around, in addition to the inequalities that Dr. Bida described and that I have also mentioned? And there are three things I think that we should be doing. One, we should think about early intervention to enhance health. And second, we should think about ways of promoting solidarity between people. And the third one, we should provide health care. And you see that I have divided intervention to enhance mental health from the provision of health care for mental disorders, because it's not enough for mental health to just have available a treatment for mental disorders. And here are some of the early interventions which we should think about. I have a nephew, and the nephew wanted to adopt a child. He and his wife had said, yes, this is a very good idea. So they've been asked to pass a course, and during the course, and then they passed an exam. They passed the exam, and they are now acceptable as adoptive parents. Now tell me, how many of the parents that give birth to normal children, not adopted children, have had 6 months of training and an exam before they were allowed to have their child? Who is training them? Where does this come from? And with the horizontalization, that is the breakup between the influence of the elders, it's even worse. And we are not using the opportunity of training future parents in school already about ways in which they should look after their children and in which they could promote these children's development. Perinatal care, although it is happening in many countries, it is still underused. We still have today a large number of things that could be done in perinatal care, thinking about their mental health, and above all, of things such as the burnout of the future mother, because she is overburdened with so many things, which will lead to a burnout and a loss of interest in life and her child and everything else as time goes by. What do we do about that? To diminish the danger of burnout, we could use perinatal care to do it. There are measures that can be done. There are ways that people can learn in order to survive better in such a situation. We should think of reforming our schooling, because most of the schooling is still given to learning about kings and queens, about Rajas and Ranis, about all of the possible other important people. But we don't teach people about life. Life skills are not a normal subject in schools. Professor Michael Rutter, some years ago, wrote a book which was called 10,000 Hours, referring to the fact that many people will spend about 10,000 hours in school. And how many of these hours are spent on learning how to live, on transmitting knowledge, which will help you to live a better life? Not very many. And in some places, zero. We should also think about the juveniles in the urban settings, and the creation of safe spaces has been a recent development, in which a small space is secured, in which young people can come to meet other young people, or can meet somebody, maybe a nurse or a person of experience, to talk to them, or just be there and read, or talk to others, or play a game. Because if they don't have such safe spaces, they have very often very little space at home, and the street is not the place in which they can meet people and be with people very well, because very soon street companies turn into juvenile gangs and engage in ways of proving themselves and proving that they are strong, which, however, ends up in bad ways. We should think about provision of care to children of high risk of mental disorder. For example, children of prisoners, or children of who are in prison, or children of people with mental illness, or children of disabled people. All of these are at higher risk than necessary, and there are ways in which we can help them. And we should also think of universally applying the knowledge about mental health first aid, because there are things which we can do when we see that somebody is under stress, which might turn into mental disorder. And there are things in which we can make life for people easier, better, and more enjoyable, if we know how to do it. So that's the first area of doing things which we already know. And we should hear things also about strengthening solidarity between people. We should rethink of how we can support and create communities, maybe through sport, or maybe through courses which we are giving, or maybe in Singapore, for example, elderly people are invited to come for regular walks in the park. Costs you nothing to walk in the park. And they are learning about the names of trees and the plants that the trees have, and I don't know what or not. And then there's another group that is dealing with it. They're teaching them how to sing, and many of them have remarkable singing capacity, which they never knew they had. And there are so many ways and so many things that people have tried to bring together the sense of community and knowing that you can call somebody when you're in trouble within towns. We should orient the education so that it strengthens solidarity. We have seen in Pakistan, for example, that an early teaching about stigma can significantly enhance the capacity to accept children with disabilities in school. Small disabilities, but still disabilities, where people are very often mocked or attacked or in many ways excluded because of minor things which they might have. Maybe a different streak of hair or another problem which they might have, even when they have glasses. In some countries, we have been able to provide glasses, but children didn't want to take them because that meant that they will have negative comments from other children. We should give administrative support to mutual aid organizations, such as parent organizations. I think that they often become voluntary, but soon they fail because whoever is leading it and carrying it on his shoulders may be sick or may disappear or may lose the interest. And we should think of ways early on about ways to help one another. And that is something important. And one particular form of that is the education of people who look after other people. There is a huge increase in health, in visiting health services of people who have to look after somebody, not for mental disorder, but for physical illness. And people who look after others are under tremendous stress and have to be helped to carry it further. Finally, the provision of health care, of course. I think that there are, of course, the provision of health care in the sense, but it includes more than just treatment of disease. It's including the mobilization of the person whom we are treating to participate in the cure. Very important, very difficult. We should also make sure that people who come to us in the field of psychiatry will have physical illnesses as well, because comorbidity is so frequent. And people are suffering from many diseases at the same time. And we cannot allow the fragmentation of medicine, which will not give them the treatment, the training, and the treatment they need. And I think it's terribly important also to understand that healthcare agents must be partners with persons who are not well, rather than any other relationship. They must work together to get the disease out of the way. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think that the unequal world in which we live exposes most of the world's population to risks of mental disorder and to damage to our mental health. We can do a great number of effective measures to prevent mental illness, to treat mental disorders, and enhance our health. And these include the provision of health services, as well as many other actions which I mentioned. I think it is possible to preserve and promote mental health in an unequal world if we decide to do so, and having decided, do it. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, sir. And with this, we have inched towards the end of this program. So before closing this webinar, I have an added responsibility, and that is to express our gratitude to all those who have been part of this. At the outset, I would like to thank our director, Dr. Devi, for giving us this opportunity and entrusting this responsibility on to us. And Dr. Sonia P. Devi was the rudder and who really helped us to navigate all the different issues that we faced during this time in organizing this. And a very big thank you and a very heartfelt thank you to both Dr. Sartorius and Dr. Ajidi, who have shared their immense experience working in the field of mental health. And for this, almost for me, it felt almost that poignant portrayal of the reality related to the inequalities when it comes to mental health. So thank you for giving us this insight and giving us food for thought, and also, helping us to look forward and not to be lost because of this unequal world that we deal with. And I'll carry this, what you said, Dr. Sartorius, mental health, it's like the sky. I mean, even though there are dark clouds hovering around, the sky is still present. So that this was something that we should all, this is a very positive statement, which I think all of us can carry forward and think about. Before ending this, there are a few people that I would like to thank, and I would like to take their names. This 1 week has been quite hectic for us, putting things together, and there have been a team of people who have helped us to do this, and some of them are sitting here, they're not on screen right now. So this is Dr. Abhishek, Dr. Ilamurugu, Dr. Puranjita, Mr. Sandeep. This is a team that put everything together for us. And then very special thanks to Mr. Utpal, who's taking care of all the technical aspects here. Then Mr. Nirmal and his team, who had tirelessly worked to keep this program going, giving us the support, the electrical support, and making all the repairs that is required at the last minute. So big thank you for all of you, and a big thank you to all those participants. I think we've had over 100 people who have, sorry, 100 odd people who have participated from across the country, and I think many more are participating through the YouTube. So thank you all for your patient hearing, and then I hope that we carry forward the messages that our esteemed speakers have given us. Thank you all once again. Thank you and have a good day. Thank you.
Best wishes to your institute.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you.